You're listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. This is the show that talks about identity and access management and making sure you know who has access to what. Let's get started. Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff. How are you?
Not so bad. Yourself?
I'm doing great. I am a little bit sad that it's the last day of the conference. We're here at the Gartner IAM Summit in the RSM podcasting suite, the suite. We've talked about that.
The terrible joke.
Yeah, that's the joke that's getting a bit too old, but fortunately we won't tell it that many more times. And I had a thought today.
Oh, boy.
What makes a person part of the identity?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think probably being part of the speaking tour, contributing back to the identity body at large, right? All the people who are in it. So I'll be honest, I don't know if I like the name because it feels like it's elitist a little bit, but I get the concept of it. And I think anybody can be part of the identity, but to do that, you have to be contributing some way back. Right, you can't just be a consumer. You need to be a producer of something. That's how I would define it.
So who gets to determine whether you're the identity? Other people or you?
It's like a nickname. You cannot pick your own nickname. It has to be bequeathed upon you.
Ooh.
Someone has to tell you that you're part of it and or consider it. And I think it's probably something where I'm not worried about it's not like a one-off thing. Like, oh, I gave a speech once and now I'm part of it. That's not how it works. I think it's continued repetition and continued, production of things back to the identity community at large. That's how I would think about it.
Well, just to bring it full circle, so our guest today is Vittorio Bertocci, and I asked him the same question. What makes a person part of the identity?
And it's Vittorio Bertocci. Come on, man. Show some respect.
Hey, have I pronounced anybody's name right today?
No.
Thanks for having me, guys. Well, it's a very, very difficult question. I'd say, that scene in The Matrix in which the Oracle tells Neo, no one can tell you if you're the one. It's like being in love. Only you know.
Or it's porn.
Right.
You know it when you see it.
Yeah, you know it when you see it. But I think that there are two definitions come to mind. One is if you have 1 degree of separation from Ian Glazer, the SVP of Salesforce, then you can call yourself an identity. Even if you are his, baker, I think that if he knows Ian and they are on a first name basis, you can call that person an identity. That's one litmus test. But another, which is more verifiable, I think that whomever has spent enough time and engaged enough with the community to have opinions on identity matters that will be considered and respected by others as valid opinions, as opposed to just like parroting the talking points. Like actually someone that connects the dots in the context of identity and delivers a statement, which you might agree or not agree, but you see that it is competent and relevant, and you see the rationale behind it. So to me, anyone that is in that position is an identity. Now, I agree that often that is correlated with contributing to the community, because it's rare that people can be a lurker for a decade and then suddenly one day wake up and say, here's my statement. Usually it's a dialogue, it's a conversation. But yeah, that's the criterion I use.
I think that's pretty fair. And for those who don't know Vittorio, definitely part of the identity. You've probably seen him striding the halls. He's been on the show a few different times. So if you want to learn more about, his background, I would encourage you look into our back catalog with that. So we're here at Gartner IAM Summit 2022 in Las Vegas. Jim said sad to be done. I feel like I'm more like relieved that it's over. How has the conference been for you?
For me, this was a very good instance of a Gartner IAM. The last one I attended was in 2019, and it was good, but this one was better. I think that maybe the 2 years interleaving or like lots of other details, which I cannot share, but it's Vegas after all. But it was good. Like I came here specifically because I was lucky that I was able to participate to a number of conferences in the last few months, but all of those conferences, apart from RSA, they were all very technical. And so I felt that skewed me farther toward what happens on the wire and details that us blue collars pay attention to. And a big part of my job is to advise my feature teams. And I felt I needed a full immersion with buyers, people that think about getting the job done rather than how, or that think in medium to long time horizons rather than the tactical, I need to do X. And on that respect, it really delivered. I'm lucky that I'm fairly recognizable, like long hair, long nose, long chin, everything long. And people are not shy to stop me on the aisles. And I just had so many impromptu conversations which delivered exactly on this. And I'm also very lucky that I know well a number of analysts. And so apart from the one-on-ones which we had scheduled as part of a conference, I just had, again, a number of impromptu talks with Felix, with Henrique, with Eric. So those were really good. Like those guys are super insightful, and it's a privilege to have a chance to speak with them. And finally, these will be familiar with every conference goers. You have a chance to catch up with your colleagues which sure now we are in the Zoom era, and so we are used to interacting remote, but having your legs under the same table is an entirely different level of engagement. And I very much enjoyed that.
It has been very cool. I've the hallway conversations, reconnecting with people you maybe haven't seen in person for 2 years, 10 years, whatever it may be, that sort of thing. I mean, Jim and I have been doing this thing for 3 years now, the podcast, and we work together all the time, but we don't actually see each other in the real world all that often, especially over the last couple of years. So it is very cool to have that camaraderie. I almost felt like it was almost like a little bit of a celebration of kind of people. I saw you on the street at RSA. We were probably both going different directions and different, things and stuff like that. But I also felt RSA was a little bit of something like that too, where it was like, okay, we're back. That sort of that feeling like, okay, we're kind of under the same roof again. We're seeing people in person, and I felt like this conference as well had the same type of ideas. This is something I pointed out, I think, last week when we were kind of getting ready for the podcast, was the keynotes seemed to be focused not on technology or the market or anything like that. It was focused on a lot of human-centric things, storytelling, communication, and taking into account other people's perspectives and what are the things that have been happening throughout the year, or, the last couple of years, from a health perspective. Are there any things that surprised you from a conference standpoint? It was like, oh, that's interesting. I wasn't expecting that. Or things along those lines, maybe hallway conversations or other interactions you might have had?
I'd say that there are two main things that surprised me. And perhaps they shouldn't have, but they did. One was the session on the hype cycle from Felix. And Felix is an excellent speaker and a great analyst. But I was somewhat surprised by how matter-of-fact he was when he described some of those things. The hype cycle have so many things to talk about, and the time is short, and he has to take into account that some people aren't familiar, so there is this little introduction to what there is. So he didn't have a lot of time left for every item, but in general, he was very, very direct, and I really appreciated that. I think that so many people look at Gartner for guidance, and that was good. It was really good. Again, it's not that I was expecting it to be bad. I just didn't expect it to be so direct, which was great. And the other thing that I really liked, so surprised, more like marveled rather than surprised, was a session yesterday from Eric about the identity fabric. The basic idea is that you can think of like a maturity model between that connects the traditional IAM with what we have been calling modern identity. And basically, he interpolated to what's next. And he has this concept of identity fabric, which is basically a collection of capabilities. It isn't really a product. And the way in which he characterized those capabilities just hit it on the head for me. Like it was a very good way of describing what we should expect, like what we need to do for moving to the next level. And that was very good. I plan to explore that aspect further.
I think when I hear terms like identity fabric, I get concerned around, okay, zero trusts, ITDR, all these other things. It's like every product seems to like glom on to whatever the term du jour is. You know, I see products like, oh, we are the zero trust blah, blah, blah. We are the UBA blah, blah, blah. And I see things like that. And it's like, identity fabric, I've been hearing it for years. And I'm concerned that at some point we're going to see, we are the identity fabric, blah, blah, blah.
I think you can bet that it will happen. Unfortunately, marketing eventually owns everything. Mm-hmm. And even concepts that have technical merit will be strained and tortured and their arms twisted to fit a particular go-to-market. Because that's the way it is. Like capitalism rewards people who sell, and so people sell. I think it's on us, the more, technical people, to try to keep our own marketings honest, which is, like, I think everyone tries to do that. But the other is also when we engage on actual projects, to make sure that we do use those concepts beyond the hype, that when we are working with our customers or with people that aren't as deep as us, that we help guide them through, like, with objective things. Like this thing about zero trust reminds me like a bit of a growth mindset, or like these mandala keywords that people use for, and very often are just abused. And the way to diffuse that is to just break down into fundamental components what makes something zero trust, and then say, okay, let's test this thing that you just said. Is it really zero trust? And you can't always afford that because that requires a high bandwidth conversation. And a lot of people just go with shorthands because they are just doing things on passing. But maybe it's okay. Like think of like how people torture also things like SSO or federation. Mm-hmm. Like sometimes in discussions you just have to let it go. Yeah, like you have to choose your battles.
I was gonna say that.
And there is like it's probably gonna be the same.
I have only so much energy. Is that the battle I want to fight?
Yeah, exactly.
So let's talk. Let's see. We're kind of there's a few different things we want to get to. For those who don't know, though, you are a fellow podcaster. We have the distinction of you actually announced your podcast a couple years ago on our show, Identity Unlocked. And for those who haven't heard it, it is fantastic. You get to hear Vittorio having conversations around really I want to describe this, like the meat of identity, the specs, the standards that are being put out there that are so important to the interoperability of so many different identity things. I'm probably butchering how you would probably explain to someone else. So tell us about Identity Unlocked. Certainly go and catch it. We'll have a link in the show notes, so go check it. It's everywhere. But how's Identity Unlocked doing?
You are far too kind, and you gave a very, very good description of the show. Like the idea is largely the fact that standards have such impact on so many things in the context of identity and beyond, and at the same time, they are just like these hard things to deal with. People very often deals with them at the wrong layer. Like they think that they have to re-implement stuff from scratch, and so they need to read the spec, as opposed to knowing what a particular spec unlocks in terms of scenario, and then just using tools like SDKs and services that will take care of the low-level stuff. And the other thing is that the standards, like the specifications, typically are very obscure and also very essential. Like every sentence is debated by experts for literally years. And so the end result is precise, but it's a bit like the IKEA instructions, in which if you don't follow them exactly to the letter, you'll end up with something rickety and some extra pieces saying, what did I forget? So the thing is that so much goodness, so much knowledge is part of the process of building the standard. And that gets completely lost if you are not part of a discussion. So the idea behind the show, which we don't always manage, but we try, is to take the experts, like the author of a spec, the chair of a working group, and talk with them the same way in which we would talk at the bar here at the end of the day, talking about what happened, what we found interesting. And with us, there is someone who is not an expert. And so we know that we need to not use too much jargon and somehow go to the real meat, to the value proposition rather than the how, more of like the why and the context. And so we try to do this. We try to democratize substantially those specs, inform people about what is their significance. Like, for example, we use better tokens everywhere, and we covered these new ways of securing tokens. You don't need to know the details of how it happens, but you need to know that now there is this capability that allow you to have more secure interactions. And a bit of a context of like how this thing came to be, in what situations you can use it, in what situation you can't. So we try to do this, and it's a privilege. It's a privilege because I speak with such incredibly smart people, which are very generous with their time. And I think it's going really well. Let's say that I was expecting these to be ultra niche, and instead the numbers are surprisingly good. Like, we have a lot of people listening to this thing, and it generates a lot of good discussions, good questions. It helps the people that are developing those standards to get the attention they deserve, which often they get lost in the noise. So it's going really well.
Yeah, Vittorio, I totally agree. The people that you're getting on the show are super smart. Sometimes I listen to it just to try to get myself smarter. What I'm wondering is, for the IAM practitioners where maybe they don't need that level of detail, if you could kind of pick a few of the major topics that are happening in the, in this space of standards evolution, maybe top 2 or 3, and just kind of tell us where we're at with each one of those.
Sure, absolutely. And for at least some of those, we actually have also episodes. So if people want to double click, they can go there. I'd say that the one that is top of mind for me is FIDO multi-device credentials, which is the scientific name of a more common name, passkeys. And in a nutshell, that's a new type of credential which takes, if you're familiar with the platform authenticators in FIDO2 WebAuthn, which are basically using the secure elements on your devices, so the TPM on your laptop or like the secure enclave on your phone, and it basically use that to authenticate using public key cryptography unlocked by the biometrics of your device. And it takes this idea, which was an extraordinary achievement of the FIDO Alliance, but that was mostly adopted by either administrators or key information workers, so not by the consumer, because everything being tied to the device makes it complicated for enrolling multiple devices, or if you lose your device, you don't know how to recover it. So this was always mostly either for administrators or a second factor, because you needed the first factor if you needed to retrieve it. And finally, I'm getting to what passkeys are. Passkeys basically are taking the same mechanism, but allowing the keys to roam. Let's say that whereas the traditional platform authenticators tie the key to that particular device by design, like some administrators might want to say, I want to know it's coming from that device because that device has my security policies on it. And so it has its own purposes, but at the same time, it made it difficult for consumers. And so vendors like Apple, Google, and Microsoft had this idea of making this thing roam. And so what happens is that now, and just today, literally, we published a blog post on the Auth0 blog, and wherever we also have a little demo of our integration. What happens is that if you are in a particular ecosystem, say the Apple ecosystem, and you get your Mac, which today you can already do if you install Ventura, you go on a website that supports passkeys, you can enroll in the same way in which we are enrolling before with a platform authenticator. In fact, if you look on the wire, it's almost exactly the same. Like the code you already have will work. And you can sign up to your website, basically creating a local key. And then as soon as you do that, your iCloud will start roaming this key on your other devices. And then you can pick up your iPhone with iOS 16, land on the same website. And as soon as you get on the website, one of the really interesting things of this is that there are so many primitives that make the integration of this capability very, very easy in terms of the user perspective. So if you just tap on the username field, and if your website used the new APIs that iOS offers, this thing sees that there is a passkey for that particular domain, and then just offers you a little pop-up saying, hey, even if it's the very first time that you land on that website on that device, you already have this thing available. You just put your thumb or do your Face ID, and you are signed in.
It's a potential real game changer in terms of getting away from the password, right?
That's what I was just thinking. That's the word I was literally going to say was roaming is the game changer here, because this concept already exists, but is very limited. Being able to move from device to device is, I think that's the part that's going to really take off.
That's absolutely right. I think you are absolutely right. And this is both convenience for multi-device, but to me, the main thing is the recovery. Because again, today, if you use platform authenticators, you can't just use that as one factor, the only thing you do for authenticating. Then there is always the discussion is in it's both something you have and something you are, or something you know, because it has to be a key that lives on your device, and the way in which you unlock that key is either by knowledge, the PIN, or the biometric. So one might say it's, how to say, it is multi-factor, but there is controversy about you need to use attestation in order to know that this actually happened. So let's pretend it's just one factor, although it's actually two. But the thing is that because of that, and because of the fact that it's tied on the device, if you lose the device, and if you buy a new device, there is nothing you can do to recover your access to the website. Instead, now that this thing is backed to the cloud, basically in that scenario, Apple is the party responsible to help you do a recovery, or you buy a new device and you just restore everything, just like today when you buy a new iPhone, you put them side by side and it just transfers everything. So that's powerful and a game changer and a good big improvement if your starting point is passwords. Now, the controversy here is that if your starting point is platform authenticators, then it's kind of like a step backward. Because now you can no longer prove that that particular authentication is coming from that particular device, or you are no longer in control of the way in which account recovery is done. So if you are an enterprise, or if you are like a federal government, those things might not be good things. In fact, there are a lot of discussions about it. And the thing is, this is going to be very vendor dependent. Let's say that we were saying standards. Like a standard part is multi-device credential on the FIDO side. But then there is how the various platforms choose to implement this stuff. And in the particular case of Apple, they decided that once they will release the new versions of their operating systems, which is just about to happen, I hear, then they will no longer make it possible to create keys bound to the device. So passkeys will, basically everything will be a passkey. Even if you have a key that is on that one device and didn't roam yet, you will have a bit when you receive a key that says, yeah, I am a backupable credential and I haven't been roamed yet. So you have some chance of checking, But the thing is that you can't prevent this from happening. Let's say that, sure, now I received this thing and I know that it hasn't roamed, but 1 second later, this thing might roam. Or Apple has this feature in which you can airdrop credentials, just like you do with passwords today. And I remember seeing like WWDC happened at the same time as RSA. And there were like a couple of like watch parties, people like watching this thing happening. And I've seen people in horror because like the RSA audience is clearly like saying, what? He did what? They just like airdrop in a private key basically to a different device. So again, if you read that blog post that I mentioned, which I penned, you'll see that our position is this is a fantastic game changer in our war to passwords for consumers. But so much remains to be figured out on the workforce side. So good news, but with moderation, with nuance.
So what else? And of course, I want you to hit on the digital driver's license as one of the items on your list.
Yes. So let's make sure that we don't lose that. The mobile driving license is also something that is happening in this space. It's being driven by ISO, which is a bit less familiar for us in the identity space, and to myself as well. Like I am participating as a liaison on behalf of OpenID. Like the OpenID Connect Foundation is working with them, and in particular, for example, Christina Yasuda from Microsoft is one of the main people that is working with them. And basically, they're trying to make the use case of a mobile driving license used on the web rather than in person with devices to be done with the experience that many years of OpenID Connect brings. But just to summarize what this thing is a representation of your driving license in a format that can be used with digital devices. So it's a digitalization of your driving license. And this is defined as a CBOR, which is like a digital JSON set, but in not digital, sorry, binary format, which contains the list of your claims, let's say, and then it has a mechanism which ties those claims to one key, which is only yours and only belongs to your device. And so whenever you use the driving license, you can basically use the data that you have on your device and disclose those, proving that you are the one disclosing it because you use your local key without the need to go to any central authority. Like if you'd be doing these with ID tokens, let's say, then every time you have to present your driving license for some reason, you'd have to go back to the provider. The provider would issue stuff just in time, and then the provider would know to whom you're gonna disclose this thing and when and in what terms. And instead, by using this mechanism, which is conceptually the same as the one as verifiable credential, which is another of the things which is being taught a lot about. But when people say verifiable credential, they often think about things like the W3C standard, which is a specific standard with a specific structure. And the mobile driving license is similar, but not exactly the same, although the concept is the same. And so it is a very powerful privacy-preserving capability. There are challenges. Let's say that in order to do the trick that I just described, you need the client software. Like if you just do this with an ID token, you'd just do a couple of HTTP redirects and you'd be done. Instead, in here now, you need a wallet. And
wallet, right?
Viewers cannot see my quote because wallet is such an overloaded term recently. But basically, you need a piece of software that runs on your device, which is capable of requesting those things. Those are like verifiable credentials / mobile driving license. Save it in place to keep it stored, protected, and whenever you need to present it, actually do the trick of selecting the subset of things that you want to disclose and use the key to prove that it's actually coming from you. And then once a recipient receives this thing, there are two parts in which you have to verify that this thing is actually coming from you. So they need to check the signature. And typically, this signature has a reference inside the part which is signed from with the claims that ties those two things together. I know that I'm getting in the weeds now, but unfortunately, some of these things are just like at that level. If we were to up level, let's just say that you need to have active software that runs on your device. This software is absolutely critical, and it's not there. Like mobile driving license is not the only reason for which people might want to have this software in there, which is why we have so many different definitions of wallets, which are largely interoperable, non-interoperable at this time. And so there are a number of nascent groups or a number of private alliance between companies that are trying to make things interoperable, but at the same time, a lot of the issuers of those things want to retain a high level of control. And so you can expect that some of those credentials, maybe not the mobile driving license, but some of that ilk will give you also the application. So basically, it's like having a wallet for every card you have, rather than a wallet with multiple cards. So it's still early days. We'll need to see what happens, but a lot of things are happening in this space at this point.
Right. That last point you made makes me think. I'm going to make a statement, which is from everything you just described, it doesn't sound like the mobile driver's license is going to be following decentralized ID. In other words, putting it on the blockchain. Is that right? Is that not the direction that things are going?
So, as far as I know, there is no need for anything decentralized.
Because this seems
Wait,
like
are you
this
killing blockchain? Did you just kill it?
But it seems like
Guys,
this is the Uber
guys,
use case.
don't-
It seems like this is the Uber use case. If it's not going to happen for digital driver's license, where's it going to happen?
It's a landmine that I very rarely choose to venture. And this isn't going to be an exception. So I'm going to give you a very non-committal, very high-level answer. But in particular, in this particular case, this is one of those cases where you have an authority, which is the Department of Driving Licenses, or which is authoritative about whether you can drive or not. And that has been responsible to verify your identity. And it's actually certifying that when they issue this thing. So to me, having the identifier or the key material that you use for protecting presentations of this thing wouldn't buy you much. Because sure, you'd have your identifier that is entirely under your control, but that would only protect the presentation in which you show saying, yeah, I am the legitimate owner of this thing, of this identifier. But if for some reason they catch you driving high and they revoke your driving license, and so the inner part of the presentation, which is the one that says, yes, Jim can drive and he's over 21, it's no longer valid, then having your identifier to check out won't help you. If you were presenting this thing because you were banking on the authority of the issuer of those attributes, then it won't pay you much. And in terms of infrastructure, it's non-trivial to choose what to use, when, where, and similar. And that's just on the holder side. Then on the verifier side, things get even more fun because in a traditional scenario in which you have your ID token, as I mentioned earlier, what would happen is that the receiver would be fixed. Let's say that your provider, the issuer, knows the audience to which you are sending this thing to. And so, and the receiver would be in a trust relationship with the issuer. Let's say that the moment in which you establish your relationship, you acquire the keys that you need to use for verifying the signature and all of that stuff. Now, in this world, in which you receive your credential on your device, and this credential is not bound to any particular verifier, you can spend it with anyone. The moment in which you send your presentation, the verifier needed to take this presentation and verify that the content actually comes from that particular issuer. And it's not obvious how to do that because like who's gonna issue this thing? Is there gonna be like one giant issuer for everyone, or are you gonna have every local department of driving classes, every county that issues is something, and then are we gonna have all different keys, or like how are you gonna handle this? Like this freedom of talking with anyone and everyone comes at the price of having less rails. Which again you wouldn't have if you would be establishing trust relationships, federations, and similar. And so there, again, honestly, I have yet to start digging into the details of the spec, but it's perfectly possible that one solution might be PKI. Welcome to 2022, in which you might have like one CA that issues all of those certificates, and then anyone that wants to accept those things can, accept things signed by the certificates that come from that particular CA. Even if it works, that would be for the US, for one particular document. And now multiply it for the various documents, the various countries. Here at Gartner, I've seen one session about decentralized, and I'm not gonna say almost anything about that session. But the one thing that I've seen which is relevant to this was this idea of trust fabric, in which people are just publish themselves on this trust fabric, and somehow people pull stuff in and out. It was very unclear to me how that would actually work in practice. And unfortunately, it's a pattern, because every time people talk about this particular aspect, it's kind of like, that episode of South Park with the underpants gnomes, which were the gnomes that say, step 1, collect underpants. Step 2, question mark. Step 3, profit. It's like, what happened between those two steps? I don't know. And this time also, this edition of Gartner IAM didn't answer this question of mine.
I think there's so many questions still. I think that's the issue is there's good questions and there aren't any good answers yet. I think like that, the identity fabric or mesh that you kind of referred to just now, where you can publish anything to it, strikes me as basically what we're doing is we're creating a Reddit for identity, where the people have to upvote and downvote which sources do they trust.
That's a very interesting way of looking at it. I think that the challenge is that, just like with passkeys, like the exact same technology can be an improvement or it can be a step back. And so the thing that you just described, which is also pretty popular in certain circles, like the social proofs, which it's a clever mechanism which will work for some scenarios and will be completely unfeasible for others.
Would you trust it for like your passport? Right? Here's a government saying, oh, well, somebody just decided to spin up their own passport service. Enough people are using it and say it's good, must be okay, right? I'm sure that's secure.
Yeah, but luckily that none of these is going to be a problem for the driving license. I think that the driving license is being designed again by the ISO people, which are among the most rooted in hardcore reality than you can find. And I'm very, very happy that that thing is happening. I think that this is like the paradigmatic artifact that can embody the verifiable credentials. And I think, to be clear, that the verifiable credential concept is a great concept. And it's just that a bit like what we were saying earlier about marketing taking over, it's not only marketing. Like sometimes also like technical people will get really enthusiastic. Like I'm not saying there is any ill will from any side, but people will fall in love with an idea and push it without necessarily having figured everything out. And sometimes it's fine because that's the way in which innovation happens. Some other times, if you are postulating, and here there will be an anti-gravity device, well, if everything hinges on you discovering anti-gravity, that might be complicated. Right. So that is my only criticism to that. But again, I love mobile driving licenses. I love the concept of VCs. What I don't love is people ignoring some of those details and then misleading the people that are not in this space. Because when you sell a really nice story, which it is a nice story, like the idea of like you are in control of your own credentials, You choose when to disclose and to whom, and people will not know about it. Yeah, like it truly is a good story, but there are complications. And also, it's not the entire story, because a lot of privacy issues happen at sign-in time, but in my experience, the bulk of it happens when they observe your behavior. Like, you could sign in with an incredibly secure, privacy-preserving system, and then you buy something, and you need to disclose where to send this stuff, which suddenly can be correlated to lots of other things. I can almost see like the zealots here hearing me and saying, here, there is a solution X for that problem. Sure, absolutely, but is it practical? Are you volunteering this detail when you are saying this is the end of centralized? That's the other thing. Verifiable credentials will unlock new scenarios that are difficult or impossible today, but they will not necessarily substitute some of the scenarios that are working well today. And instead, like, again, people like very bright lines, primary colors, basic shapes, and simple messages. And so the idea of like, this is the next evolution, which entails we'll stop doing what we are doing and we'll start using those tools instead, again, is misleading, because some of the things that are, how to say, privacy violations in the concept of in the context of a consumer activity can actually be completed by design when you are working with two suppliers and you do need to share some information. So it's just a complicated thing.
Well, I think that's where the magic comes in, right? Once it becomes easy enough for people to adopt, or there is some sort of cohesion between these different concepts. I think I'm not sure who said it, right? But it's, if it's magic or technology, it doesn't matter as long as the result, right? Something like that.
Yeah. So there was Arthur Clarke that said any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Yep.
And I agree with you, but one thing that I would add, and then I'll stop ranting, is that most of those things to me are driven by use cases. As in, people have an issue in their life or something that they want to make progress in, and it doesn't matter how, something appears on the scene and helps them with that particular problem. And in this space, we are all guilty of being so close to the matter and to the domain that we often instead look at the principles. And we say, okay, here I have this new principle. Users must be able to control absolutely everything and what this website saves about their session. And the outcome is some of those cookie dialogues that you see for European websites, and their only outcome is people just clicking OK to all because like whatever. So if you just start with a principle, and then when rubber hits the road, things might not pan out the right way. And so I think that the pendulum has to swing a bit closer to the use case for some of those things, so that we can focus on what we can actually do to help people using those new technologies, rather than saying, oh, wow, this technology is cool, I want to use it.
Yeah, such a great point. It's really important to step back and think about things in kind of that philosophical way, which I think has always been part of our industry, right? You can't just look at the tactical of how do I do things. You have to be thinking about the big picture.
I agree. The big picture and the people that will benefit or not from what we are creating. Like, I'm a huge fan of suggesting to engineers that I work with to spend the time on forums and see what people find difficult. Even if it's still at low level, it always gives a glimpse of what people are trying to achieve when they're using your tools. And it's always better to start from it rather than starting from technology and then reverse engineer from it what people might possibly do with it. Sometimes you're lucky, like remember the PageRank with Google. Like when Google started and they had a PageRank, it like was incredibly successful, but no one knew how to do money out of it. And eventually they discovered it, and I'd say they lucked out because they didn't start with this idea of making money. But eventually found it. So moving one level below, it's always possible to create a technology and by sheer chance land on a great new use case, like think Post-its, like the glue of Post-it. We were trying to do something else, they invented the Post-it. That's fantastic. But those are rare events. It's usually innovation is better if you start from a user need rather than a technology or a high horse principle.
Well, the same applies to identity programs at large, right? If know where you're trying to go and what you're trying to do, a lot of times it's just like, okay, I've seen it before. Like, oh, we just bought this thing and that's going to solve our problems, but you don't really know what problem you're trying to solve, and then you're very disappointed when you find out that the investment that you made didn't line up with what you're trying to do.
Yeah. For me, like the visual that I always have is like the fidget spinner. Remember when fidget spinners were everywhere? Like everyone.
Yep.
Like, why?
I've got a cool one, by the way. It's I have two. There's a Tesla one I have, and then I have one that has lights at the end.
Oh,
that I got at a
nice.
conference somewhere. Because it's like you said, fidget spinners were everywhere. They were like the swag thing back in like, was it 2015, maybe something like that. And I was like, all right, I'll succumb to that one because that was one I hadn't seen yet.
Very nice.
All right. I think we've waxed poetic around a number of different topics. Vittorio, you're always great with your time and super generous and super approachable, which is, again, part of the thing that I love about the identity field itself. But before we go, I want to tell you that you have enthralled the identity nation through your Twitter and this undertaking that you took when before you even boarded the plane to get here. You have a CO2 meter, and we're taking readings throughout your journey here. First of all, again, enthralled is the word I've used because I've been following and looking at your Twitter. It's at VibroNet, and you can see, the different readings. First of all, how did you come up with this idea? And then what were some of your findings of your research here?
So I stole the idea. I am part of but I stole and I told the person I'm stealing it.
So it's okay then.
Well, the guy liked the post, so I guess that it was okay. So I'm part of a few Facebook groups for frequent flyers, and one guy did this on the plane, and he had a meter for proper reasons, not like just for being funny like I did. His job is he had a number of meters on board, and I said, well, it would be fun to see what happens. And so he did this post, which I found super interesting, and I said, dude, I'm gonna steal this idea, and I'm gonna do the same when I go to Gartner IAM. So I hit Amazon, and magically in 2 days I got this thing, which it was like $40, so not particularly. And funny story. After I started publishing these tweets, they ran out of it. Because I kept having people saying, I want one. And so they actually bought enough of those from the link that I provided that they ran out of it.
Hopefully you used like an affiliate link or some sort of referral link.
I'm not sure. I might have, because I do have an affiliate, but whenever I go on the website, I never know if it embeds it. But I found it's really interesting because frankly, I was surprised by a number of the things that I found out. Like in particular, the Uber that I took for going from my home in Redmond to the Seattle airport, I got to almost 2,000, which was like the highest reading on the entire trip. And
so let's establish, because people may not be familiar, what is baseline? Like, what is a good number or good reading, essentially?
So I started with my first reading outside. So I was outside in the breeze, and I had 400. And 400, which like someone said that if I would have done these in the 70s, I would have been like the 200, 300, because like there is all those cars. And also, why did I do these with the CO2? The CO2, to me, is in many crowded places in a proxy for exhalations of people, hence potential COVID risk. Like I came back from my Daniverse and I caught COVID after dodging it for 2 years and a half. So now I'm a bit sensitive. I was always sensitive of the matter, but like really curious about it. It's an imperfect measure because CO2 comes not just from people, but like in the Uber, I'm convinced it was the exhaust of a car that was going inside of a car, which is not very healthy, but also like the face mask won't help with that. But I wore it anyway. And the other thing is that you might still have a high level of CO2, but you might have like HEPA filters that take away the bad stuff. And so high level of CO2 might not necessarily mean high levels of potential COVID, let's say. But anyway, approximation also, I did it for free. No one paid me for doing it, so whatever. So that one was interesting. And so the baseline is like around 400. And then in the Uber, it was like, went all the way to 2000 as soon as he closed the windows. Like I entered, it was like 600 or so. Closed the window, started, went to 2000. And then the thing that I was surprised about was how well ventilated the airport was. Like the lounge, like the public restrooms were like 700, 800, which is not great. The restroom in the lounge, elitist, it was like much lower. It was like below 500, I think. The lounge was like 500, 600. The gate was lower than the lounge. There was a literally breeze. I posted a little video of my hair moving in this little breeze. And then the plane, as you might expect, the values went up during the boarding. So during the boarding, if you want to wear a mask, that's the time in which you should wear it. Well, I know it's like people, so also people cannot recognize it, which is good. But then as soon as we closed the door and we went up, as soon as we were in altitude, it dropped down. And then once we started our descent again, I guess that we do something with pressurization, and it started climbing back up. So that was also interesting. And then now I checked readings during the conference. I didn't publish it because I didn't want the Gartner to freak out and saying, this guy now is like...
Get him out of here.
Yeah, but like it was actually really good. Like most of the time, it was like 500, 600, which is very good for an enclosed place. It was only one particular session, which was it was a vendor session, and it was in a smaller room with a weird layout. It was very wide and very shallow. And there I got to 900. But that was the only place. Otherwise...
Still safer than being in an Uber.
Oh, yes, definitely safer. So it was a fun project.
So I think there's like this new like seal of approval, and I can picture like a little sticker with like, you know, your face on it, maybe the hair blowing in the wind, and then like a number that's like, oh, you know, this session or this conference or this room is, you know, Vittorio approved or something like that.
CO2, low CO2 Vittorio approved.
Yeah, something like that.
I love it. I'm going to go on Zazzle.com and get the stickers ready.
Yeah, there we
Next
go.
time I'll show you.
Make sure I'm sure we'll see like the shop link on Twitter.
Yes.
Jeff, I wanted to just follow up with something you were saying about Vittorio being generous with his time. And we say that a lot because everybody is very, very generous to be on the show. But I also want to just point out that Vittorio is not generous with his time only to us, but to everybody. And I sat down at a random table for breakfast this morning, like I always do, and you came up, right? Because they wanted to know who's going to be on the podcast today. And I said, Vittorio, and they didn't really know you, but they knew who you were. I said, just go up and talk to him. Like, he's one of the most friendly people out there. So this podcast is kind of a time capsule. I think if you're listening to it and going to a different conference that Vittorio is going to be at, and maybe you're like, I'm a little intimidated because I don't know him and he might not be friendly. No, you're wrong. He's very friendly. Go up and say hi.
Thank you. Like I'm always happy to talk with people, and I have to admit that my ego swells every time someone comes and takes a selfie with me. And I'm so spoiled because at every conference, almost every day it happens. And I always ask them to tweet it, but they usually say, yes, I will, and they don't. I always feel a bit
Well, we're going to
betrayed.
take a picture, and then I will tweet it.
All right, wonderful. Thank you.
That's a great
My
idea.
ego thanks me.
All right. Anything else you want to cover?
No.
Can we let Vittorio out onto the town, let him loose upon Vegas?
We'll let him loose.
Okay. All right. Vittorio, thank you so much again for being part of this. Really do appreciate it. Looking forward to future conversations. Check out Identity Unlocked. It is a very good podcast. And I'm not just saying that, but it is something that adds a lot of value for folks. And I think it's good for people to kind of see different perspectives. get into the weeds a little bit. I will admit, sometimes I get a little bit lost, and sometimes I'm learning a little bit through osmosis. But at least I am picking things up, and I feel like I'm more conversant around a subject that Vittorio has touched on. So it's definitely worth it. Identity Unlocked, find it everywhere that podcasts are at, basically. Thank you so much. You can find us on the web, identityathecenter.com, on Twitter at IDAC Podcasts. Take a look for the picture that will be posted there. You'll hear this far later than when that picture will go up, but appreciate it. So with that, we'll go ahead and let everyone go. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk with everyone in the next one. Thanks for listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. If you like what you heard, don't forget to subscribe and visit us on the web at identityathecenter.com.